much or not focusing anymore on the convention, but on giving to the European Parliament a constituent role, like Spinelli did in 1984. No? So these are some of the elements of the discussion. I think it's going to be very interesting for us. So I'm not going to, I have spoken for minutes, so I think it's very disciplined for a moderator. And immediately I will give the floor to Virgilio D'Astoli. I think you all know Pier Virgilio D'Astoli. He was parliamentary assistant at the Italian Chamber of Deputies and at the European Parliament for Altiero Spinelli, and thereafter director of the representation of the Commission in Italy, and right now is the president of the Italian section of the European movement, and other activities, but I'm not going to make it longer. So, Virgilio, thanks a lot for coming all the way from Rome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dominic, for this invitation and to be together with the Federalist friends. The European movement in Italy created in September 19 an Italian platform on the future of Europe with 200 members, collective members. We met 12 times, and the last time it was 2 days ago, and we discussed about the situation on the future of Europe. So my ideas are ideas that are shared by the members of this large platform that I think it doesn't exist in other countries, putting together 200 collective members. So I would raise your attention on 2 or 3 points. First of all, more or less, we celebrate, if you can say so, the fact that 15 years ago, the Lisbon Treaty was signed by the member countries, 28 member countries. So in this 15 years, we had a lot of problems. The financial and economic crisis, international terrorism, migration, pandemics, the war, climate change, and so on. It is absolutely clear that the European Union was able to face to some problems with the next generation EU and so on. But it is absolutely clear that after 15 years, this treaty is very old. This treaty is not a treaty that could give the possibility for the European Union to solve problems that the citizens raised also in the conference on the future of Europe. And also we have to take into account that normally after the single, each more 4 or 5 years, the member countries decided to modify the treaties. As when you put your car each 2 or 3 years to see if the car works or not. In a wise approach, if I can say so, the governments decided each 4 or 5 years to modify the treaties. But on the contrary, this treaty was signed 15 years ago, and the government made a lot of things because they decided to modify not the treaties, but as we say, the material constitution with the fiscal compact. Many things without a normal and formal modification of the Lisbon Treaty. So that is the first point. We have to take into account if face of this situation, the way forward is to introduce a few modifications of the Treaty of Lisbon, or if President Mattarella said we have to go behind the Treaty of Lisbon to elaborate absolutely a total new treaty. So that is the first point. Second point, when Macron launched in March 19 the idea of a Constituent for Europe, he didn't speak about a convention. It was clear from the point of view of Macron that the moment was not to introduce a modification of the treaty, but to put on the table a new method. The new method was to put together the participatory democracy and the representative democracy. So the conference is a very innovative instrument in which the citizens participated with innovative instruments. And finally, concerning the Conference of Europe, you know better than me the Conference of Europe, there are 2 points. First of all, it was an alliance between the citizens and the European Parliament. It was very clear that finally, if we see the 49 recommendations of the conference, these recommendations were a kind of alliance between the citizens and majority of the parliament, not all the parliament, of course. And the second point, it was very clear from the point of view of the governments that they were against a lot of things. You remember that the governments were against the possibility to introduce the working groups. We waited until October of last year to start with the working groups. And they were against the working groups for 2 reasons. First of all, because the working groups were a place in which the decisions were taken by a majority. That was not the case. You remember the compromise of March, that the fact the conference should decide on the principles of consensus. And the fact that these working groups, that was not the idea of the governance, should be transparent, a public debate. So it's very important because I think that finally the 49 recommendations are there because of the working groups that had the possibility to elaborate very innovative ideas. So that is the situation. Now the question is that what we can do to make a new step towards a federal union. First of all, I would say that a constitution is not a treaty. There are some friends, also federalist friends, saying that the constitution and treaty are the same thing. No, a constitution is not a treaty. A constitution is a text that should be elaborated on the basis of large consensus, putting together all the political forces. For example, you know that in an intergovernmental conference, normally only the majorities of our countries participate in negotiations. On the contrary, the constitution should be a text in which we can find a large consensus, putting together all the political forces, majority or minorities in our countries. So that is the important difference. My opinion is that taking into account the conference on the future of Europe and the fact that we have to open a way for a federal union, the way is not to introduce a few modifications of the treaties. When the parliament in the first legislature decided not to ask the government, because sometimes there are some friends that say that we have to ask, I don't know, the governments, the Holy See, or I don't know who, to give to the parliament a constituent role. No, the parliament in the first legislature was not in the situation to ask the government, please give us a constituent mandate. The parliament decided to assume this mandate, this role, without the agreement of the governments. You have to take into account that in 1979, the parliament had only a consultative role. It was not written that the parliament had the role eventually to elaborate a treaty. And it was a big discussion in the parliament if the way was to suggest to the governments a few modifications for the treaties. That was the approach, for example, of Klaus Hensch and Katharina Fock, saying that if we want to play a role with the governments, we have to ask a few modifications of the treaty, ask the Council to accept our proposals. On the contrary, hopefully, the Parliament, on the inspiration of Altiero Spinelli, decided not to propose a modification of the law, but to elaborate absolutely a new treaty. That was the Spinelli draft treaty adopted the 14th of February 84. And the second thing is that the idea of the Parliament was not to give this treaty in the hands of an intergovernmental conference, but on the basis of the Convention of Vienna on the international treaties, to discuss and to negotiate this treaty with the national parliaments. Unfortunately, for different reasons that I will not speak now, the Parliament was not able to adopt the text in September 83, but in February 84. So we were able, as European Parliament, only to discuss with the German, Belgium, and the Italian Parliament. And these three parliaments finally gave their agreement to the Spinelli draft treaty. Because the treaty was adopted in February 84, it was not possible to negotiate with the other six national parliaments. So the idea of the Parliament was not to elaborate a final text. The reason is that because the text was, the name of the text was the draft. It's important to remember that the name was draft, because the idea of the Parliament was to elaborate a draft, to discuss this draft with the national parliaments, to negotiate with them, asking not only their opinion, but eventually amendments, and then to give to the next European Parliament elected in 84 the capacity to elaborate a new text taking into account the opinions of the national parliaments. So then you know that finally we had the Single European Act, but the governors accepted the idea to modify the treaties of Rome. That was not absolutely clear before the initiative of the Parliament. So now we are in this situation. The opinion of the European movement in Italy is that in this situation, taking into account, as you know very well, the fact that there is a large group of the governors against the idea to convoke a convention. In July, we had 13 countries, governments against. Now we had a new Swedish government, we have unfortunately, a new Italian government. So if we calculate and we see the discussions in the Coreper and the Council, probably there are 15 governments that are against the idea to convoke a convention. So our opinion is that in this situation, the Parliament should not propose a list of modification of the treaties, but to elaborate a draft report indicating the main elements of the European Constitution, to adopt this text next year, to submit eventually this text to interparliamentarian conference we made in Rome in November 90 Assise, so to discuss with the national parliaments and to ask that this text should be the main text for the next electoral campaign. So don't wait 2 years, but dedicate next year to this debate on the future of Europe. That is the leading role of the Parliament. The Parliament, in the resolution in January 20, said we want to place a leading role, so the Parliament should make a leading role. The leading role should be indicated in this report. The Parliament should adopt for us next year. The political parties should discuss with this report of the Parliament and then fight. It will be not so easy, but we have to fight to ask that the next Parliament will assume this constituent role as the Parliament made in the first legislature. So that are more or less our ideas. I think that in front of the immobility of the Council, that is my last word, we have not to wait the decision of the Council, but the Parliament should assume this role to respect the initiative and the proposals of the citizens in the Conference on the Future of Europe. So 3 steps. One step is the Parliament should adopt this draft, indicating the main elements of a new treaty. Second, the electoral campaign. And the third, the constitutional role of it. Take into account, that is my last word, that in all the parliaments, there are a minority of innovators, a minority of immobilists, and a large part of the parliament that has no idea about what they want. And win the minority that is able to find the large consensus of this large part of the members. We won in the first legislature because between a minority of innovators, led by Altiero Spinelli, a minority of immobilists, we were able to have the consensus of this large part of the parliament. A political fight is, we can win, we can lose a political fight if you don't fight. We can win if we fight. So our idea is to fight, taking into account that in the next European Parliament, it will be a minority of innovators and minority of immobilists, and a large part of the Parliament that will have no idea about what they want to do as new members of the Parliament. So that, I think, that could be a strategy, and we will present this strategy also tomorrow in the Federal Committee of the European Federalists, hoping that the Federalists will be able to adopt a real Federalist strategy. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, Virgilio, for the very interesting presentation and for keeping exactly to the 15 minutes that we have, because it's important that after the panel, the many assistants in the room and online that I thank for attending have maybe also the chance to pose a question. And I take note of something that you have said, that it is true that that is important to take into account that certainly in the European Parliament, I think many felt disappointed with how the French presidency ended. Because, and this is important to be said, because I think in some federalist circles, at some point there was a process of beatification of Macron as the federalist messiah for Europe, no? And if you see the end of the presidency, it was not so much so, because of course the parliament produced two resolutions, the one in May, even before the conclusion of the conference, and then the one in June, clearly asking for the convention and for activation of Article 48, with the conviction that, of course, Macron was going to seize that moment and that input from the parliament to bring the matter to the last summit of the last EUCO, the last European Council summit, and instead, for me very surprisingly, I have to say, went for the European political community as the new big thing, when that's just a forum of countries. I don't see there much potential. And then there was a collective failure of the European Council as a whole, when they made a big push for enlargement, as you know, in that summit, without mentioning that that should have gone hand in hand with deepening. For me, very surprising that, you know, the member states pushing for enlargement on automatic pilot could not be pressed by countries, you know, the core countries, to say, okay, we give you enlargement, but of course, we are going to put a word. It's not so much to ask. This has to go hand in hand with deepening. So not even that. So I think we have to take that into account going forward. Now I'll give the floor to Daniela Vancic, who is connected online. She's the European Program Manager of Democracy International. She received her bachelor's degree at Michigan State University and holds a master's in international relations from Geneva School of Diplomacy and International Relations. So, Daniela, many thanks for making the effort to connect online, I imagine from Cologne. We hope next time you can participate in presence with you know, better conditions for you. The floor is yours for 15 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Can someone just give me a heads up that you can hear me? Okay, I think I see some
Yes,
nodding.
we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. And yes, I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person this time. I think that we're really right now at a make or break moment, and the steps ahead of the next European elections are going to be really critical. That's also the role of the European Parliament and what steps could be taken there. But it's a question right now we have to ask ourselves if all the institutions are ready, because it's clear all three seem to be in different acceptance stages, let's say. The EP clearly at the front. It has been the most outspoken institution when it comes to calling for treaty change and for a convention. The Commission, I think, has also paved the way for these constitutional discussions by, first of all, even announcing the conference on the future of Europe in the first place. And now the Commission has also positioned itself clearly in favor. But of course, the decision to convene a convention is now with the Council, which is split among the 27 governments, each with their own problems, their own agendas. So a simple majority, which is required according to Article 48, is just not there yet. We can be sure about that, unfortunately, as Virgilio also said. But I think trends are changing. Taboos have really been broken due to the conference. I think personally, this is one of the greatest achievements of the conference, that we had almost like this big group therapy exercise where we reviewed the state of the EU right now. We reviewed where Europe could do better, where the Lisbon Treaty doesn't go far enough in letting us work better, more efficiently, and especially considering that we are living now in a Europe that today is different than when this conference started. I think this Kiev moment, as it was called often in the conference, this was really the shifting point to jumpstart the discussions on the fundamental reform of the EU. So that's why I say I think the conference allowed us to really break the taboos around these visions for Europe, and the Parliament has been really at the forefront of all of that. But this constitutional moment, I think we won't be able to ignore it for much longer. At least the member states will not be able to ignore it for much longer. So how concretely that could look like, and how a convention could be built, could be designed, I think that it's not too early to think about that already now. I think we need to have these visions already on the table, because when it happens, it will happen quickly. And I think it's important also to look maybe at the upcoming presidencies of the Council. Now, let's assume if we have a majority in the Council, or maybe there's a legal way to bypass this that I don't know about. I'm really not a legal expert at all. But I think maybe our next realistic change would be under the Spanish presidency. That's in the second half of 2023. So if this were to happen, if we were to design this constitutional convention, there are some ideas of how I have that. I think how this could look like, and what we should consider. And it's not too early to think about this already now. So firstly, we heard from, over the last months, really even the start of the conference, from multiple academic and legal experts, also with the Citizens Take Over Europe coalition that I'm a part of, that the Lisbon Treaty, that Article 48 does allow for some kind of flexibility and openness when it comes to the actors that are involved in the convention. And we know that according to Article 48, the convention needs to compose of at least MEPs, commissioners, members of national parliament, and EU leaders. But in the 21st century, in a modern Europe, we can't have a constitutional process without also involving citizens, without a strong democratic aspect. I think constitutions have to be designed with the people. And we had this earlier this year, this Chile process, which many of us were following this, a little bit nerds of this process. We were following this closely. In the end, it was not approved in the final referendum, but the process the Chileans used could offer us some inspiration also here at EU level. And that could be an election of a constitutional convention delegates. And theirs was quite inclusive in Chile. They reserved about 10% of the convention seats for indigenous people. They also had that each list had to present candidates with disabilities in at least 5% of their candidates. And there was also some rejected proposals that I think are quite ambitious, There was about securing seats to people from gender or sexual minorities and securing seats for Chileans living abroad. So I think these are things that we could consider in a European constitutional setting, at least some version of them, maybe seats for EU permanent residents, not just EU passport holders, for example. And the Chileans also had gender parity, so equal representation of men and women, which the conference on the future of Europe also achieved gender parity. That's a big achievement compared to constitutional discussions at EU level in the last several decades. So I really suggest that this needs to continue to be the case in a convention as well. And then we should also consider space and allocated seats for civil society, just like was the case for the conference. So in the midterm, if we can manage to get a commitment from the council during the Spanish presidency, for example, I could imagine that when people go to vote for the European Parliament elections in 2024, that they vote alongside their MEP, their delegate to the convention. I think also coupling this up with European Parliament elections, this would help raise the awareness of the convention among the general public. So that in the first place, that's something that the Conference on the Future of Europe was not able to achieve because there just wasn't much of a role for the general public aside from the digital platform. But inviting them then to vote for their delegate alongside MEP would generate this public awareness a lot more, I would say. I would say we also consider a citizens initiative type of instrument alongside the convention, something like the European Citizens Initiative, where citizens could collect signatures on different topics important to them. And if a certain threshold is met, it would be submitted to the convention, placed on the agenda of the convention, and had to be discussed there. This also would allow citizens to mobilize, to put topics on the agenda. It would give a role to citizens, of course. And another role for citizens, I think, because we've done quite some experimentation with citizens assemblies now at EU level with the citizens panels and the conference, and they will continue now in 2 weeks, as you know. So I would also suggest a randomly selected citizens assembly or citizens panel to also feed proposals to the core convention body. So how I see a convention really structured is you have the core body of the convention consisting of the convention actors that's outlined in Article 48, as well as those convention delegates elected by the electorate, maybe at the European Parliament elections when all Europeans go to the polls anyway. And then you would have these various modes that feed the convention and build the agenda of the convention. So the Citizens Initiative instrument, the Citizens Panel, for example. And then I think the working methods of the convention could look something quite similar to the Conference on the Future of Europe with thematic working groups. I would also say voting mechanisms should be introduced, which was not the case in the conference, at least not in the plenary. Voting was only incorporated in the citizens panels. So these are some of the ideas we've thought about already. Democracy International for years now, but also with Citizens Take Over Europe, we've been following the conference. So as I mentioned, I'm not the legal expert. Maybe there's also some legal experts in the room who can tell us how this could be built, but we're coming from the perspective of how we could make the convention, which sooner or later a treaty change will have to happen because this constitutional moment is, I think, around the corner. It's clear the Lisbon Treaty is not going to be the last treaty of Europe, and with changing dynamics in Europe, we see that we need it now more than ever. The taboos have been broken, so we're definitely going in that direction. And it's not too soon to think already about how to design this convention. So these are some of the ideas we have to make sure that the convention process itself needs to be as democratic as possible, as transparent as possible, as participatory, and to take a lot of the learning experiences from the conference and also from experiences around the world. I think we have many of them we could learn from.
Well, thank you very much, Daniela. And you just you didn't use all your time, but that's fine. That helps us. But still, I think you delivered very important points. And I think it's very important that you reminded this is something that it was not said in the introduction, but it is true that now we are very focused on the way forward, but there is already a very important achievement of the conference, as you explained, that is that the taboo on treaty change or the adoption of a new treaty has been broken. And certainly people like Guy Verhofstadt and others in the room know very well. In 2014, for instance, not only in 2014, but during the term 2014-2019, this discussion was nowhere to be found, was totally outside the radar. You couldn't mention that at the time and get any traction anywhere. And now we are seriously discussing it, even though we have, of course, the big challenge of dealing with the Council. And I think you have also made very interesting contributions on if we go for a convention or if the convention happens, to make it much more participatory and innovative than, let's say, the one that happened now 20 years ago, exactly. Now we move on to Roberto Castaldi. Roberto Castaldi, Chief Editor of Euractiv Italy. He is also an associate professor in political philosophy at the eCampus University. And he is also the administrator and research director of the Center for Studies, Training, Communication and Planning on the European Union and Global Governance, and collaborates with the Fondazione Centro Studi sul Federalismo of Turin. And apart from that, he is a federalist activist, so not only an academic, president of the Italian federalist movement in Tuscany. So, Roberto, I know you have many also interesting ideas about the convention. So the floor is yours also for 15 minutes.
Thank you, Dominic, for the invitation, and thank you for organizing this interesting debate. I want to touch on two issues. So the first is, how can the Parliament conduct and win its battle for treaty reform after the conference on the future of Europe, and how to get any reform ratified? Because this is one of the issues that is often forgotten, is one of the reasons why many countries are afraid of going towards a convention or treaty reform, because many people think that it's impossible to ratify whatever treaty reform. So I start from the opportunity that the Parliament has following the General Affairs Council decision not to forward the two amendments to the European Council and National Parliament, by kicking back the ball to the Parliament Court, saying you are preparing a report, so we wait for the results of your work, because in the June report you also mentioned other reforms, so if you want to put forward other amendments, we'll take a decision after we see it all. I think this gives the Parliament a great opportunity. The opportunity to take a constituent role now, either by drafting a new constitution or by drafting a comprehensive treaty reform, which change substantially the material constitution of the EU, as Virgilio called it. And I think that the best way to do it is to start from the Council's own assessment of the results of the Conference on the Future of Europe. There is a very nice legal technical document about all the proposals of the conference and their legal basis, and all those which do not have a legal basis and require treaty change. And this is an assessment by the legal service of the Council itself. So if the Parliament takes that as a basis and prepare all the amendments that are necessary to implement all the proposals of the conference, it would become very difficult for the Council not to convene a convention to implement those proposals that are the results of the conference that was an interinstitutional enterprise. These proposals were approved by consensus in the plenary, and if the amendment were to make that, that would be key. And of course, the Parliament is also free, exploiting Article 48, to add other amendments that may need necessary to reach a federal Europe, to provide the Union with adequate power and competencies on energy, foreign security and defense policy, and so on and so forth, part of which were required by the citizens in the Conference on the Future of Europe anyway. And what I think is most important, and I'll come back to this later, is that one of the requests about democracy from the conference was the creation of a European referendum. And I think this is the single most important request coming out of the conference, because this can pave the way for the reform and then for writing a constitution in the next step, in the next cycle of the European Parliament. Why? Small parenthesis. Another thing that I think the Parliament should do, beside preparing all the amendments, is asking the Commission to prepare a new Cecchini report, a new report on the costs of non-Europe with a specific focus on energy, defense, and fiscal policies. Because after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there is a wide debate on this issue. Citizens are starting seeing the amazing cost that we are having on this side. We spend for the defense 3 times more than Russia. We don't have any deterrent capacity and so on. So this is something that could create a momentum to help the Parliament in bringing about the reform that would also give the Union the power to be able to act on this topic, on these competencies. And the second issue I mentioned was to get it ratified, how to overcome unanimity. I think that Article 48 can be used to start a constituent process through the convention, but cannot be used to finalize it. During the process, we need to break the legal order to overcome unanimity in ratification. And I think that if we look in the past, the transition from a confederation to a federation in the United States, in Switzerland, in Australia, was made through a new constitution that included a clause about its own ratification that got rid of unanimity, which was provided in the existing legal text. And this was also what the Spinelli project mentioned by Virgilio did, was what the Penelope project, the Commission draft treaty as a contribution to the 2004 convention, proposed as well, and so on. So we had some example of these in history and also in European integration history. Just like we have example of ratification by minority of amendment to the material constitution of the Union, as Virgilio called them. The Fiscal Compact and European Stability Mechanism were 2 treaties done outside of the EU because of the veto of the UK. They were signed eventually by 25 member states and were ratified, provide for ratification by 12 member states. So it was a minority of the signatories, provided they were from the Euro area. So this was 2/3 of the Euro area, because Euro area had 18 members at the time. So it was 12 was 2/3 of the Euro area, but a minority of the member states signing the ESM and Fiscal Compact Treaty. So this is something we can exploit in the debate. But I think that the crucial issue is the proposal of the referendum, because many people think, and I think rightly so, that whatever reform we have, if we go with Article 48, any reform will not be ratified. Because in France, there is no legal obligation to have a referendum, but it's politically impossible not to have it after you had it for the Constitution and for Maastricht and so on. If you have a referendum in France, you add up the vote of Le Pen, Zemmour, and Mélenchon, and you lose, whatever is the reform. So if you have a ratification with the old rules, there is no way we win in France, and there is no way to go ahead without France, as we have seen with the Constitution. But the citizen provided us with the answer, the proposal for a European referendum. So the next reform should include the creation of a European referendum. And I think the European referendum should recognize the fact that the Union is a union of citizens and states, so should provide for a double majority. For a referendum to approve something, you need to have a majority of European citizens, but you also need to have a national majority in a majority of member states. This is necessary also to guarantee the possibility for larger member state and small member state to accept the idea of a European referendum. And it's also recognized the federal nature of the Union, which is not only a union of citizens, but also a union of states. The second point is that we need to decide when to use the referendum. And I think we should decide that the referendum will be used when asked by the European Parliament, well asked by 1 million citizens from 7 countries like the European Citizen Initiative, for example, and for the ratification of constitutional amendments. And then we'll need to, in this case, we'll have a double majority to ratify the amendments. But what happens if some countries, there is no national majority for ratification? In that case, we need to provide that they vote again within 6 months to ratify or start quitting the Union under Article 50. In this way, we have two simple solutions. We'll probably get a referendum that would ratify the reform, strengthening the Union. We will get a majority of European citizens and national majorities in a majority of member states. And if, unfortunately, in France, we had a referendum with a majority against ratification, France would vote against in 6 months, knowing this time that this is not about the presidents they have at the moment, but it's about France staying or not in the European Union.
That you win.
And you win. Because this is like the presidential election or the election in France in general. In the first round, you vote with your heart. In the second round, you vote with your mind. And so this way is the way that we are sure that we are sure that we won't lose anyway, because whatever is the reform, all the opposition to the president in France will use the referendum just for purposes. So, and this is such a strong democratic instrument, the referendum with this double majority, that would be very difficult not to accept it. And it's the instrument to overcome unanimity as foreseen now in Article 48. And the third element we need to put into the reform is a final and transitory clause saying that this referendum will be used to ratify this very reform, thus breaking the current legal order, this constitutional break, like it happened in the United States, in Switzerland, in Australia, and like the Spinelli III project and the Penelope project foreseen when they were attempted. I think this is the single most important issue. And regarding the timetable you have mentioned, I think that the two issue, convention and constituent process, go hand in hand, because we are facing an uphill struggle. Here we are all federalists, but we are very much aware that not everybody is a federalist, especially in the council. And that the fight that we are conducting since we are celebrating yesterday the 75th anniversary of the creation of the Federalist organizations, in 75 years show us that this struggle is uphill. It's difficult. It's not mainstream. So I think we need to try to take the line of manual resistance. It would be, and this is a question for Dominic and Guy, would it be feasible for you, for the Spinelli Group, for the minority of innovators in this parliament, which, by the way, is the first parliament after Lisbon gave the parliament the power to start treaty reform, this is the first parliament that has been trying. And we need to recognize that maybe the next parliament will be better than this one. We don't know. For sure, this one has shown that has the will to fight. And it's the first parliament that has shown this will. So we need to work with this parliament now. And I think that the line of manual resistance to win, as Virgilio said, the larger majority is to go for preparing all the amendments that are required to implement the conference proposal, because this is allow the parliament to present itself as the institution that is trying to do what the citizen asked, doing on the basis of the assessment of the council. So they say, we are not thinking everything from our own mind. This is what you said it's needed to implement the conference. And on this to get the convention. Or to have the constituent mandate, but on the basis of this plan. If such a reform is able to go through with the referendum as the new instrument, then in the next legislature it will be possible for the parliament, rather than having the amendment to the treaty, to draft a new constitution, knowing that this will be ratified with the referendum. At that point, that would be feasible. I think that today, for the parliament in this legislature to prepare a constitution, I think it's very difficult for the Spinelli Group to manage to convince the majority of the parliament to do that. I think it's easier for the Spinelli group to convince them to do all the amendments that are required for to implement the conference. And I would love the parliament to write a new constitution. I mean, if that was my choice, I would go with Virgilio. But I think that we have more chances to win the battle if the parliament make all the amendments that are required to implement the conference. So I would go for the second best, because I think this is the path that may allow us to win, knowing that if we win this battle, which is slightly easier than the other one, but significantly easier at the same time, then we can do the next battle. Because if we have managed to change the way that the constitutional amendments are approved, then the next parliament can make an amendment that say, okay, the old treaty with all its mess is substituted with this new constitution, knowing that this would go to the referendum and not to the governments and not to the parliament, national parliament or referendum, national referendum. So I think that this is the way it's continued to be an uphill struggle. I know that what I'm asking the parliament to do is not easy at all. But I think we have more chances to do that, exploiting the legal analysis of the council, than drafting a brand new constitution and exploiting the fact that the idea of the referendum is not coming from the parliament, but it's coming from the conference. But since the conference was a very generic request to establish a European referendum, this leaves the parliament a great room of maneuver of when to use it, how to do it, and so on. And I think that this way, this can be the single most important instrument that would allow us to create a new constituent dynamic, as we had from the Spinelli project up to Lisbon, where, as Virgilio said, we had a lot of round of reform. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Roberto, again for keeping with the time. So this will give us, I think, at least 30, 40 minutes for the debate with all the participants. But also thank you for the insights, because there is an important element that is that, of course, we know that one of the reasons, or not reasons, excuses the Council used not to make the transmission of our Parliament request to the European Council on activating the process to reform the treaties is that we have this ongoing report in the AFCO committee. Huh? Now, one could argue whether it was a mistake by the Parliament to do this report in committee when we had already the plenary resolution of the 9th of June already activating Article 48. But it doesn't matter, because we cannot change the past. But it is true that maybe we can use that report to, as you suggest, Roberto, to go all out with something that will not have maybe a rimbombant title like a draft treaty, or maybe yes, or constitution, or Spinelli 2.0, but that in fact is a whole reworking of the treaty in a federal way. That could be, I think, something that, and of course, a little bit later, Guy will speak, and he is the executive co-rapporteur of that file. So this is something that I'm sure you will take into account. Now we will move on to, but it's a video, unfortunately. I think we can put the video. Can we put the video or not? Yes. We can. So Maite Pagazaurtundúa is an MEP from the one moment. I have to introduce her. Maite Pagazaurtundúa is an MEP elected in Spain, is a member of the Renew group, and also a hardcore federalist, member of the Spinelli group. She couldn't come in person this morning, but she has taped a message on the topic that we are discussing.
Dear friends, first of all, I would like to apologize for not being able to join you. Due to last-minute changes, it has been impossible for me to attend. Let me come straight to the point. There is no doubt in my mind. We need a convention. That is what the European Parliament formally called for, And that is what was stated in the conclusions of the Conference of the Future of Europe. The Council did not oppose it when the citizens and the other institutions applauded in Strasbourg. This blockage is unacceptable, and it must convene the convention, allow the debate to be opened, and indicate an area for joint reflection on key measures to prepare the convention. I think it is important that we keep to this line and not turn our attention to other actions. Since the last convention, the world has become more difficult, more turbulent, and digitally transformed. There is a need to hold a new one and strengthen the rules of the game in order to deal with the problems of the present. The recent crises have helped us to clearly identify our weaknesses. And I am not calling for a radical change in the design of the Union, but for an update and improvement of the rules of the game. Either we do so, or we run the risk of this wonderful project slipping through our fingers. We have repeated this 100 times, and it must be understood once and for all. To tackle the problems that affect citizens, the economy, and society as a whole, we need clear, useful, and faster rules. Today, it is up to us to provide solutions by reforming the tools we already have. And finally, it is important that citizens understand what we are asking for. The Conference on the Future of Europe gave us clues on how to do it. Furthermore, it is important that we communicate at local, regional, and national level the treaty review report adopted by the Parliament. We have to write articles, record videos, hold events. Let's get out of the comfort zone. That is where I leave it. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thanks to Maite for this clear message. And now it's the turn of Guy Verhofstadt. Of course, it's a well-known personality, probably, I think, without exaggeration, the best orateur of the European Parliament. For those of you that follow the debates of the European Parliament or work in the House, this is something that it's an opinion that cuts across political groups, I will say. A very convinced and active federalist fighter with a very interesting background, because it's probably the first one that has been first a prime minister. If you think of course, of Spinelli and other federalist fighters, they had an activist and parliamentary background. But I think you have given a lot of credibility to our cause precisely because of your background, several years as Prime Minister of Belgium, fighting already in the Council for a federal Europe, and then, of course, with your engagement thereafter in the Parliament as co-founder of the Spinelli Group, and also 10 years the leader of the Liberal group, the ALDE group in the European Parliament. Then recently you have led the conference, effectively, the Conference on the Future of Europe in your capacity of co-chair appointed by the European Parliament, and now you're leading the effort in the file that I mentioned before in the AFCO committee as executive co-rapporteur. So Guy, of course, thanks a lot for making it to today, and you have heard, I think, very interesting presentations, and you are as It was the title of the biography by Dean Acheson. I don't know if you remember, and he wrote it maybe a bit pretentiously because he was speaking of himself, but I'm speaking about you. And the biography was titled Present at the Creation. So the floor is yours.
So thank you very much, Dominic, for the invitation. And I have to tell you that when I saw the title of the meeting, I said, "Oh, Federalists going to start to discuss methods." That becomes dangerous. Why I'm saying that? Because if Federalists starts to discuss methods, those who are against the federal project can be relax even more than today. We'll say, first of all, we're going to wait that the Federalists know what they want to do, and then maybe we can, at that moment, reply to all their wild dreams that they have. And so I think it's important that we give maybe some info of what is happening now in the Parliament and what the strengths are of this and the weakness are of that. What is happening after the conference? So we got a debriefing on the conference, and there was 1,000 people here last week. 550 citizens, representatives of national parliaments, civil society. So in total, we were nearly 1,000 people. And there was one clear message to one guy of the council in the room, Beck. And I applauded the courage that he was there against his 999 other people who said, when you're going to start now to do something, to implement, to change the treaty, etc., to say yes to the convention, etc., etc. So he could not answer, or it was impossible for him to answer. But it was a unanimous request. And it was not only Parliament, it was also the citizens. It was not only European Parliament, but also the national parliaments. It was not only the legislative, was also the European Commission, who clearly 2 times, 3 times repeated that. So that happened last week. And what happens for the moment in the Parliament is that we are exactly, Professor, busy with what you are presenting and proposing. We are busy with a report. I am the executive rapporteur. That's now a new thing that we have invented in Parliament, because we could not agree who was leading the file. So we appointed 6 rapporteurs, but that's impossible with 6 rapporteurs. So you need an executive leading rapporteur. So I'm the leading rapporteur with other rapporteurs. So very creative. Yeah, very creative. In the past we called it a shadow. Now we call it a co-rapporteur. Okay, it doesn't matter. So the reality is that we are busy and that we will be hopefully ready before the start of the Spanish presidency with a second report after the resolution, indicating exactly what the professor is saying, what are the changes in the treaties that are necessary to implement the proposals of the conference. Secondly, based naturally on that paper that you have referred, but we can go further. We are not limited of the legal service, because the legal service indicated a minor number of issues that need a treaty change. But if you look to them, there are major issues naturally that are needed, and including there, because I'm responsible specifically for the institutional proposals of amending the treaty, the European referendum, in the way you described it, because I'm a very big supporter of the previous Monti proposals. Monti at a certain moment said, how we can overcome that we have a new treaty and that it cannot be ratified in all countries. Well, we have to have a system with the European referendum. If there is a majority of member states who are in agreement, that we can start. And those who don't start in the 6 months, is exactly that what you have said. They have the possibility in a second referendum to say yes, and if they don't do, automatically they go out. It's about their presence in the union that they have then their second referendum, not only about the treaty change that is at stake. So while we are preparing, so I cannot say that that it will be easy. We started with, there are 216 pages proposals. 216. So you can imagine if you talk about ending qualified majority that you nearly tackle every article of a lot of articles when you talk about the referendum. So it's a huge undertaking, and it's based on the outcome saying, what we need to do to make all the proposals possible. We thought that was not necessary to do that immediately. We thought we launched already the request for a convention, because that has the advantage that once the convention is started, that you then enter all these proposals in the convention, because the convention is not limited to the 2-3 articles that have been mentioned to launch it. So we think we can be ready, hopefully May, but before the Spanish presidency, with that report. That is exactly the translation, I should say, of the whole the intervention that the professor has done. And you cannot, you can say that's not the constitution, but I remember this previous attempt of the constitution, how it ended. But you are completely changing the character of the union. And that is what all these proposals are doing, or really giving a solution to the problems of the. So the question is now, the council says, this small, they are busy with preparing new proposals, so we are waiting. That is what is, in fact, not a serious attitude, because that is the request of 48. They need to respond to the request of 48. By not doing that and saying, we wait for the other report, I know what will happen. What will happen to you? They will say, what? You're crazy? They want to change this and that and that and that. So will they say yes to a convention next year? I'm absolutely not sure. On the contrary, it could be that they say, Parliament, they are become crazy. So they want to change this and that, and end of qualified majority, end of unanimity there and there. So a European referendum, you imagine, European referendum. We national governments have to agree and to follow the outcome of European referendum. So it could be, I'm only guessing, that they are saying, wow, this is so radical that we don't want to enter in that in that game of a convention. So it are politicians. I'm also a politician. Virginia, I know how it works. They could say, we need to know everything what you want. And then if they see everything what the parliaments want, they say, what? You want all this? No way. Like the case of the electoral law, exactly. Because the problem is not the convention. The problem is not even the content. The problem is a general problem. The electoral law is blocked. A number of member states are apparently not in favor, and they don't want to discuss it. Electoral law is 6 months. 6 months, and it's a right of initiative of Parliament in the treaty. It's blocked. Convention, they wait for the new. But it's not only that. Schengen yesterday has been blocked. 18 billion for Ukraine has been blocked by Hungary. An OECD tax, a minimum tax where there is an agreement at G7 and in the Union is blocked by one country. And so on. Migration package, I don't talk about it, is blocked since 2015. So that's the reason why I'm started about method. In my opinion, the problem is not a problem of method. There is a political problem in the Union that lasts already years, and that is not solved and cannot be solved, can only be solved by a fight through the Parliament, if the Parliament is willing to do that. And my point is, Parliament is not willing to do a fight for everything what we are saying. Because if you want to, look, we approved the budget 2023. Wow, fantastic, and we sign it. And at the same moment, the Council doesn't want to respond to a request, Article 48. You know, what I did in the past when I was prime minister in Belgium, I said, if you don't do this, I don't do that. That's the way it works in politics. So the problem of today is that we can win a fight, we can make this reform happen, we can have a convention or the constitutional process. I'm open, or the two combined. Normally, you start with the convention and then you go into the next phase. I think that is possible if this parliament has a political leadership, and I mean that not only the president of the parliament here, but of the political groups with a majority who want to say, okay, we pick up the fight and it will be that, or otherwise there will be no budget, or there are other possibilities. Oh, we go to court. Other possibility, yeah, in Article 48, but there's a possibility to go to court, yes or no, inaction of the council. The budget seems to me always the best. Have you seen in my political life that the best way to instrument that you have in your in a political system is a budget? So that because that's the money, and you don't spend the money. Okay, if you do that, I tried already once here in the house with Schulz, who was to do that. And the first who are panicking is the parliament. Because then the rapporteurs of this budget come and say, yeah, I'm a Polish rapporteur and the other is a French rapporteur. The agricultural payments will not be done to our agriculture. Oh, what a problem. And then, the cohesion funds will not give money anymore to the Polish state. So the Polish rapporteur and the French rapporteur, because it's always two rapporteurs that we appoint for the budget, will be in panic and say, no. You can do everything. Well, not jeopardize the budget. We're gonna... Okay, then you lose your leverage. So this parliament has leverage, but doesn't use the leverage. And if you don't use the leverage, they continue to play with our feet. I'm going to say it seriously. And you continue to have the council who say, we don't respond to the convention, or Dominic who face electoral law, come back in 2029. So it's not a question of method. It's, is there a political will here in this house? Because in the past, you could still rely on some council. I'm doubting about that today. You know, the previous convention, how we got the previous convention? It was not a request of Parliament. It was a common action of 3 prime ministers in the council at the end of the Nice Treaty, saying we don't approve to Chirac-Nice if you don't give us a reform of the treaty. And that was Schröder, Amato, and myself. That were the 3. And we introduced the idea of, it's crazy, you change the treaty in the Nice negotiations, saying we're going to change them again later. That was the conclusion. And that created the convention. The convention was created by an agreement between Amato, Schröder, and myself for different reasons. Amato and myself, we had a federalist dream, and Schröder at that moment was still a little bit the first Schröder on the beginning, who won the elections against Kohl, a very nationalist German program, saying there needs to be Kompetenzabgrenzung. And therefore, the convention was created. And finally, there was not a lot of Kompetenzabgrenzung because the only thing what we found was a subsidiarity system. So that's the way. So, but I don't see these 3 now. You see them? If you have them, tell me, phone me. You can always phone me and tell me who the 3 are. I don't see them. So the only way to... And that was the previous convention. So I remember that very well because that led to the Declaration of Laken, etc. So this time we need to do the thing from Parliament. At that moment we started the convention and Parliament was invited and they liked it and they were very active in it in the convention. It was very useful and very necessary. But this time we need ourselves to make it happen. And the only way, I repeat myself, is to do it with by using the 2-3 instruments that you have and to be ready to use them next year. And to do exactly based on proposals as we are preparing and based on that. And otherwise, we go to the 2024 and then 2029. And I asking myself even the question, can you do that with the political forces as we have today in Europe? That's another question that you have to put forward in 2024. Because if everybody stays on the same way of dealing and wheeling as we do today, we will never have any progress. And then finally, I think it will ultimately end that a number of countries needs to go forward and then saying to the others, look, you accept or you leave. So that's exactly what happened in America in 1785 with the Conference of Philadelphia. We need our Conference of Philadelphia, that's all. Call it a convention, call it a constitutional event, call it whatever you want, but you need to have a moment of such magnitude to change things in the union, because there comes a day that this union will disappear because of all the bad institutional basis we have. And you see it already today. Because it goes further than ending unanimity. I thought the war start with, okay, now the defense community, they're going to talk about defense community. Nothing at all. Don't talk about defense community, a little bit of training for Ukrainian soldiers, using the EPF. What was a miracle? The EPF existed for Africa, so we got it, so we used it. If it was by accident not there, we would not have the money of the EPF to help Ukraine. And it would never happen. That was by accident that the EPF was there and that there was 2.5 billion there inside the EPF, and we could use it to help Ukraine. So defense community, I thought, war with Russia, we're going to start about defense community like we did in the 50s, like the Treaty of Paris of 52. Nothing. Energy union, forget it. A cap on prices. Okay, it's good, not bad, but that's not an energy union, you know? Migration, same thing. Tomorrow, maybe with the crisis, we will see the whole discussion of the fiscal union will come back, and that's for sure. So that's a key question. And in every group, everybody and every politician here in this house has to push this question for himself. Or we stop talking about it. That's another possibility. Or we mean it very seriously, but then you have to bear the consequences and to have the courage and to use the two main instruments that you have at your disposal. And for the moment, I don't see that. I don't feel that. Yep. Sorry for the depressive remark.
Well, Guy, thanks a lot for the sobering appraisal of the political question beyond the method or methodological question. And of course, I agree with you. It is true that we need to be, I will say, more effective from the AFCO, I will say the constitution, those that focus on the constitutional dimension of the integration process, to convince our group leaders that this has to be a priority enough to make the link to the budget questions and the budget question and other tools that Parliament can use to, to bring Council to the negotiating table. Because the problem that we have, and by the way, this is why you rightly mentioned the question of the Court of Justice, which is the other route. The Council is not respecting the principle of loyal cooperation when there is a report or there is a request, and both electoral law and Article 48 are good examples, approved by large majorities by this House, with the support of roughly 5 political groups of this House, right? Political families to which all these prime ministers belong, by the way. And then they pretend to be able not to even consider and sit at the table with us to negotiate on those proposals. And this is really unacceptable. So I think that you're right, and we have to do exactly what you are proposing regarding the Council. Now, I'm glad that you mentioned two things. The Laeken Declaration that came right after Nice, and that launched.
The consequence of
you promoted that at the time. It was under your presidency of the Union, I believe, and that was a big achievement. That Laeken Declaration that paved the way for the convention, and then the Lisbon Treaty, and also just to remind everyone that, in my view, you were the first MEP in a debate in the Parliament with Borrell that proposed to use the European Peace Facility, and he took your suggestion immediately and he acted on it. So a good example also of how a Parliament can be influential. So now we have 20 minutes of debate because unfortunately I have an important meeting at 12. By the way, with the Spanish Foreign Affairs Minister, but it's not only me, it's with a group of MEPs, so I will try to pass this message also, but I can only stay until 11:55. But now we open up the debate. We will take note of 2 or 3 interventions and then replies, but I would like to give the floor to Marc Angel, my friend and fellow MEP from Luxembourg of the Socialists that has attended the entire session. So Marc.
Yes, thank you very much. It's very difficult to speak after Guy, who is always so motivating, and I can only join him. You're totally right, Guy. This Parliament has to fight and has to use the opportunities and the possibilities it has to fight. And I hope we still have a year and a half that we get into this fight modus, and that we ask for this convention. We know the Commission is supporting it, so I'm really hope that we can get into a combat mode now in this Parliament. I just wanted to react to a few things which have been said. First of all, by Daniela. I think you're quite right to remember that we are in 2022 now, and that direct democracy is important, and that the 3 criteria of direct democracy are important, and not only participation, but also deliberation and equality. And I think this is something, whatever method we choose, these 3 criteria are very important, and we tried them a bit during the conference, and that was already a good model. What was also very interesting, when Guy spoke now, he reminded all the files which are blocked. There's so many things blocked. And I think the citizens have understood that if this European project is viable, has to continue, we have to find a system to unblock, because people remember big advances we did in the European Union, Schengen, the Euro. But what happened the last years? Not very much. And if we want to keep up this movement, we need to unblock and get back on the train and get the European Union to change, and to change people's lives. And I just finish with one thing. I was a member of national parliament for 3 mandates in my country, and I regret that in national parliaments, members of national parliaments do not realize the importance of the European dimension they have. They have a huge European dimension. And also citizens do not realize the European dimension they have when they vote for national elections. Citizens think they can change European politics every 5 years when they go to the European elections. But every national election is also a European election. And I think this is what you in your national sections, but also what civil society and others have to do to really inform voters that they are voting the co-legislators. They are not voting only a government for national affairs, but they are voting the co-legislators in the European Union. And this is something which is lacking, and we cannot fix everything here from Brussels. And the whole debate which we're holding here today, and the whole debate which was in the conference on the future of Europe, has to be brought to the national level, and therefore we need strong civil society to do that. That's my conclusion, and I'm really happy that I was invited here, and I've learned already a lot, and I'm looking forward for a fruitful discussion with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marc. Also because, if I'm not mistaken, it's something I didn't mention before when I briefly introduced you. You are also a member of the Federalist section in Luxembourg. So we also appreciate that commitment. Now, I've been told that Monica Frassoni is online and would like to maybe it's good that we alternate a bit also room with, so those connected online don't feel discriminated, because it has happened to me now that there is with these evolving methods of debate, that some people consider that the hybrid meetings put those connected online at a disadvantage. So they claim that the meeting should be either physical or online, but not hybrid. So this has happened to me already. So Monica, the floor is yours. Figure this technicality. Please identify yourself and try to make it in 1 minute so more people can participate.
I'll keep it brief. I'm Zoran, I'm a Schumann trainee. And I had a question perhaps also to Guy Verhofstadt, because this idea of a European Conference of Philadelphia, right? A constitutional convention. I guess I'm wondering, would this not make this constitutional project very much into an elite project, very much into a project that where constitution is drafted, when institutional arrangement is made, when next step for the institution is taken? Yes, all of that, and of course all of that is necessary, and I would imagine everybody here in the room knows that that is necessary. But this idea of then civil society, as it was mentioned by the next intervention, I would imagine that seems to then be kind of lacking. Like I do not see how this would break the cycle of an institutional reform made at a relatively high elite level, leading to the next iteration of the European institutions, that then runs at the problem of there indeed not being a wider consensus in a European demos, so to speak, because the institutional arrangements are relatively obscure and iterations on top of iterations of one another. Of course, it is necessary to break the cycle somehow, but I guess I'm wondering how, in the wake of such a conference hypothetically being convened, one would then, in the second step, indeed go forward and communicate this to citizens and actually say, okay, reform is necessary, because something like qualified majority voting in the council seems to be something that is quite abstract to explain to an average voter, I would imagine. No? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
That was one of the key issues by citizens themselves. Citizens came forward and said, why we cannot do this? Because unanimity. Then you have to change unanimity. So that's a normal. People are not stupid, saying unanimity is difficult. If they see every day on their television screen today, block. Today is Schengen. Yesterday it was 80 billion. The day before it was the minimum tax. The day before, every day. So in the conclusions of the conference, in any way, in the recommendations, that was one of their key proposals. Not once, at 4, 5, 7. I don't know how many different places and also in the conclusions. So let's not underestimate citizens. In every working group. In every working group, it was mentioned by citizens themselves, saying, because, and they say, you have to do that. And then we need to reply, that's not possible because of unanimity. You have to change unanimity. Okay, let's put it in the conclusions, in the recommendations, and then let's put it in the conclusions. So that's the way it went. So, but I agree with you that there are other things to tell to the citizens than only an institutional change of unanimity to a qualified majority. And costs on Europe. There are enough. I can say a European army is maybe not a bad thing when you spend 250 billion euro every year in Europe on defense, and you can do nothing at all without the Americans. Maybe also not a bad thing to tell. Sorry,
very well.
But I
so,
think, otherwise,
so this is answered. More questions. I don't know if we're ready with Frassoni. No, we're not ready. So, other questions from the room? No? No? Ah, please.
Good morning, my name is Egle and I'm coming from Spain. I would like to start saying thank you very much for the invitation. It was such a pleasure to hear all your proposals and ideas. And I would like to start to say that when we talk about the future, we always think about the youth. What my generation, in this case, is going to do to improve the future. We have seen how, thanks to the Conference of the Future of Europe, European youth have become more involved in the European Union project. We have seen that it's possible for the youth to be involved in policy development. We have seen that we have really good ideas that can contribute and help to improve our society, because these ideas represent the needs of all the citizens. And it's important also for us having some feedback from the sector that led our daily life with their decisions, such as the institution, more specifically the European institutions. So have you thought about the possibility to give to the youth as speaker in this future convention? Have you thought about the possibility of giving us a voice to be part of the new European Union that we want to build together? Thank you.
Okay, so if there are no more, we still cannot connect with Monica? Okay, so no other questions from the room? No? So who would like to answer the question by, I don't know, well, maybe you want also to answer, apart from Guy, the first question, and then we have also the question from Egle on the youth dimension. So Virgilio, you go.
No, if I can react, I totally agree with Guy that the problem is there is no political will. There is no political will first in the council, because as you know, the majority changes in the council. I know very well the Italian situation, but you know, Sweden and so on. So for the moment, there is a center-right majority in the council. Probably it will increase. Probably, I don't know, but it's possible. And in the parliament, there is no political will. So we can invent very interesting, imaginative ideas, Roberto Castaldi and me and so on. But if there is no political will, all the very imaginative idea that we can invent, there's no chance to succeed. That is the problem. So I agree with the idea of, because we wrote in the European movement many times that we need a European referendum, because you didn't say this, because in 13 countries, the referendum is constitutional or political binding. So the idea of European referendum is to avoid the possibility to have 13 national referendum. But we have to know that the European referendum need that the national governments agree to convoke a pan-European referendum, because you can't impose a referendum. So I agree, but the question is that you need in all the that you remember that Spitals proposed the referendum in Belgium, not for the constitution, for the European mandate to European Parliament. But there are a lot of problems in Belgium to organize a referendum for the a historical problem that you know in your country. So more or less, me and Roberto, we agree, because he said the European Parliament, this Parliament should elaborate the constitution. I say we have to elaborate not the constitution but the draft, but it's more or less the same idea. But if there is no political will in the Parliament, we can speak about all the things that we do. Okay. That is the question. We saw the confusion and so how we can, and that is the point of yours, how we can create this consensus. We need, at the moment of the Spinelli draft treaty, it was not necessary because we had no social instruments, the youth was not there and so on. So we succeed with Spinelli draft treaty because we create a consensus in the parliament. At the beginning, we were only nine MEPs. And finally, we had the majority. But we had to create a a consensus outside the European Parliament, outside the Council. So I think that as federalists, we have to think about this, and we have to speak, and that is my last question, outside the federalist movements. Because if we discuss about our organizations, I know very well the citizens take over Europe and so on, but that is the Brussels bubbles, even if sometimes they are in different countries. So if we continue to speak between us, we arrive in nothing. So we have to mobilize other organizations outside Brussels. That it's important to create a consensus that for the moment, that is the main part. Oh, tomorrow, when we speak with the Federalists, we have to say that the Federalists will go outside and speak to the others. And if you speak between us, it creates nothing. That is the problem.
Yeah, it would be already good that the federalist movement increases its pressure inside this parliament. That would be also an interesting, no, really, to the leadership of everybody of these groups and say, yeah, can you imagine we're going to do this big report next year? Okay, that comes. It's approved. Again, the same story as now.
Yeah.
Or Parliament in the accompanying resolution says, look, if then within 2 months, they say something, there is not a convention convened based to discuss this, okay. We stop the work. We do a strike, it calls. A strike, eh? Yeah. That's why in Belgium we have a lot of strikes. Yeah, but look, and that is a discussion that, or a decision that we cannot take, but that the leadership of the different groups have to take. Is it so important that we take up the fight? Yes or no? That's the point. And that, 1 year before the election. I think it makes sense because it's also to put the parliament and to make all the population in Europe aware that there is a problem, that it needs to be fixed, that it is the thing that you need to discuss during the election. That makes sense, no? Huh? Okay, it's today, Euro-activities, I think. Spitzenkandidaat approved, says the council. Voila, and we are sitting here discussing. I don't know if, okay, I would start a revolution. If then I see that Spitzenkandidaat, okay, transnational is approved, gedaan, convention, we don't respond, and we say, we approved the budget 2023. We are very look, that is not. We can discuss Virgilio. I know you are already very long on years and years and years. This, but if there is no change in the political will in this house to pick up the fight, there will change nothing.
But the question.
Thanks. Thanks, Guy. We have gotten the point. Now, let's give the floor back to Daniela, who is online, so it's not only the panel here in the room.
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. I want to mention a point about the youth question that was brought up, because I think we didn't talk enough about it too. And if we're talking about also then the future of Europe, fundamental reform, we need to be involving youth. We know, of course, the conference proposals, that this is what's serving as our basis to call for a convention, our strongest argument to call for a convention. And those proposals were drafted with 1/3 of youth, of course, as you know. So in the convention process itself, I think that there should be some permanent seats also reserved for youth. And then in the European citizens panels that I propose should help feed proposals to this convention. We should continue this tradition to have 1/3 youth. I don't think that this is the case for the panel coming up in 2 weeks, and I regret this. I don't know why that's not the case, but I think also then going back to the constitutional process, at the end of this process, we would also call that there would be referendums on the new constitution, so the outcome, what comes out of the convention, and that takes place at the same day, on the same day in every member state, with these majority thresholds also that was already presented by Roberto. And that there also 16 and 17-year-olds would be allowed to vote then in that European referendum to approve or not approve then that constitution. So I think we should always think where we can bring in youth, not just in the citizens panels way, which is a really great way. That's the agenda setting proposal, but then also in the end, the final decision, the vote, we should start thinking about also European referendum and keeping the age down to 16, 17.
Okay, thanks a lot, Daniela. I want to recall on that point that back in the previous convention, there was a European Youth Convention. There was a youth version. I don't know if people remember that, a youth version of the convention. I was part of it, by the way, as it was Roberta Metsola. That's where I first met her. Of course, she's younger than me. She has done better than me, but I met her there. And that started as a, mostly I will say, you remember that, maybe Guy and others. That was at the time a PR exercise or marketing operation by Giscard d'Estaing. It was meant the gathering lasted for 1 or 2 days, and that was supposed to be the end of it. But then it got a bit of traction, and maybe we can think of something similar, but of course, not just or not at all as a PR operation as it was meant at the time. Now, I want to say something about what you said, Guy, on that it is true that we as federalist politicians, we have to be much more active and put much more pressure. And some of us politicians play or have played roles, even executive roles in the federalist organizations or in the Spinelli group. But when push comes to shove, it's not unusual to see that party affiliation or political expediency takes precedence over the federalist, affiliation or conviction. So we have to take that in mind and not to allow at this very important moment. We haven't had a situation like this ever before in Europe. We cannot allow ourselves to fall into that. Roberto, you want to say something, but quickly, because now we are really at the end.
Yeah. 3 quick points. How do we create the political will in the parliament? And I think we should go back to the issue of the costs of non-Europe to mobilize citizens and so on. Second, you say the federalists should push on you are the one who can tell the federalist organization where are the obstacles. I mean, we can have, for example, a campaign on specific people in the parliament and so on, but you in the negotiation can identify where are the obstacles, and then we can try to mobilize section and those in those countries and so on, and there's specific things. We need to have a stronger coordination probably between the Spinelli group and the federalist activities, and I think for the political will, if we work on this in the year before the election, it's always easier to get the parliament to take up a fight than in other time. So also the timing of the report and so on may help us.
Okay, well, then we conclude with that. Unfortunately, big apology to Monica that you're hearing me, because apparently the program that we have chosen for those connected online does not allow to request the floor. And we have tried to make you a panelist, but apparently in order for you to pose the question or make your comment, but apparently we don't manage to make you, online panelist in order to intervene. So we will do better on that respect, because the idea was that everyone could participate, not only those in the room, but also those connected online. But in any event, I think this has been, a very illuminating session. We have also this, of course, we could do only with those in the room, but don't worry, Daniela, you will get your package when you come to Brussels. We have given you 2 publications on the Ventotene experience and also on the rethinking of the Ventotene manifesto for the current times in paper. And by the way, many of those present, including Guy Verhofstadt himself, participated into that paper. And at the end of the paper, after confirming the vision of the Ventotene manifesto and the new tasks ahead, there is also a discussion about the strategy in which we already, at the time, said we go for convention, constituent method kind of B plan. But I think, and this is a good thing that, as you did in '84, this federal manifesto says is a proposal of a manifesto, because I think we missed the most important bit in the strategy section, which is the one you said, which is the fight, take the fight to the Council from the European Parliament. So we will update it. And once again, thanks a lot. For me, it has been fascinating. I hope also for you, and we will do more. Have a nice weekend.